I had a thought the other day that I thought would be pretty good to share. I was thinking about control effects. I was having a discussion, I think it was in my Discord server, about hard control versus soft control and like the severity of control. And it got me to thinking about like we tolerate hard control effects in other games, particularly video games. Like I was playing Heroes of the Storm, a MOBA, and there's lots of hard control in that. In fact, nearly all the control effects are hard to control. That is like a stun, so you can't do anything. It's a root, so you can't move. A silence, so you can't use abilities. A blind, so your attacks just do nothing. These are all hard control because they say you can't do whatever. Soft control, of course, I've talked about this before. Soft control is you can, but. And then the thing that you are trying to do is either penalized or limited or reduced in some way. That is soft control. Hard control just says you can't do the thing in general. So I was thinking about, like, why do we tolerate, and it's not just Heroes of the Storm, of course. Lots and lots of video games have hard control. You get staggered so you can't act for a second. Whatever. And I was like, why do we tolerate these things in video games? And then when it comes up in role-playing games, it feels so bad. Like, why is it so much worse to be stunned for one turn in D&D compared to, stuns in Heroes of the Storm? Regardless of how long they last. Some of them are like, half-second stun or a 1-second stun. Some of them are much longer than that, like 4 or 5 second stuns. Actually, I don't know if any of them actually go quite that long. And stuns of that length absolutely can get you killed in those games. You can be like, well, I just went from full health to 0, unable to do anything. That sucks. Feels bad. But it doesn't feel as bad as losing a turn in a role-playing game. And I was thinking about why this is. And I came to some conclusions that I would like to share. I think it has to do with the turn-based nature of tabletop RPGs. Nearly all RPGs are turn-based in some way. Whenever you get into an action scene, you're going to be in a turn structure of some sort. Not a universal rule. There are exceptions, of course. But most RPGs, you have a turn. And you don't get another turn until the following round. Depending on the exact initiative structure, you may be able to go like, last in one round and then first in the next round. So you actually kind of have 2 turns in a row. But for the most part, you are going to be waiting for everyone else to act on average before you get to act again. And I think that's key. I think that's what it really comes down to because, regardless of how streamlined your system is, the more actors you have in the scene, the longer it's going to take to resolve all those actions. Now, it may be very simple where it's just like roll 1 die, note a number, or don't if you miss, whatever. Like your turn could be as little as like 10, 15 seconds. Most games, it takes a little bit longer. If you're adjudicating spells, applying new effects, if you have like multi-target things where you need to attack a lot of people at once or whatever, you may have like a 4 or 5 minute turn. That can happen. That can happen in any game, almost any game. And I think that's what it really comes down to, is that if I'm sitting here, I get stunned. Like, okay, that sucks. And then I wait 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe for my turn to come up to be told, you don't get to do anything. You're stunned. Better luck next time. Hope you don't get stunned again before your next turn. You don't actually have any agency in this because you don't get to act. And then you moves on. That really sucks. It's the time investment. In a video game, you are stunned for a number of seconds. That's usually how long stuns last in video games. Seconds. Now, those seconds can be huge in the context of the game. In D&D, you are functionally stunned for upwards of half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, depending on the game. A stun is huge in a tabletop RPG because of the turn-based structure. And so I think that is something that game designers need to really take into account when you're creating control effects for your game. Player versus monster, or player versus NPC, I guess, if you prefer. Player versus NPC control effects can afford to be a little bit harder and suck a little bit more because the GM has more toys to play with. They have other characters that they get to activate, or, you know, environmental effects, or what have you. So you can afford to be a little bit harsher in that direction. But going as the player only gets their one character most of the time. There are, I know of an exception, where you can play more than one character at a time. Anyways, generally speaking, you have one character. And if you lose your turn, you're losing a significant amount of time in the day. You know, you show up to play a game. You don't show up to be told you can't play a game. Because that sucks. It sucks as much as, like, let's say your character gets just, like, instantly killed at the very start of a session. And your party might have access to resurrection magic, but they're going to have to wait until much later. You know, sometimes it's like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours before they can resurrect your character. And in the meantime, you're just sitting there, not participating, because you're dead. You don't get actions. You don't, I mean, like, you can comment on it, you can interact with the other players, sort of socialize, but really what that's doing is slowing the game down, making it longer before they can resurrect you. You know, and so I think it's important to be conscious, to be cognizant of this issue where denying a player the ability to play the game usually lasts a long time, relatively speaking. Even if they just lose one turn, they're losing several minutes of their lives, you know, waiting to be able to interact with the game again, to be able to engage with the game. And you want to avoid situations like that. So soft control is, I think, nearly always, especially when directed at player characters, I think soft control is nearly always preferable to hard control. Or that you could use the types of hard control that still give you lots of options. You don't want really, really hard control, like stuns that completely take away all your actions, completely take away your ability to play the game. If you have, you know, like something like a wall of force, or like a force cage that creates a small area, that's hard control. You can't leave that area. You cannot cross this path. But there are enemies inside that you can engage with. You know, that kind of hard control is more fine, because you still have options. So you just need to keep in mind, like, how are the players going to engage with this? And if the answer to that question is, well, they're not. They're just going to take it and better luck next time. That's a bad mechanic. That's bad design, and you should probably change it. Either as a GM running a game that may have these effects in it, or as a game designer creating these effects. You got to think about when you're making your monsters, like, you know, is this effect going to let players engage with the mechanics? Or is it going to basically take a player out of action? Because if it takes a player out of action, basically for any amount of time at all, even one turn, that sucks. That's not a fun time. And, like, I get you want to make your monster scary, and removing turns is probably the fastest way to make it scary. And that's why these things exist. I'm convinced that the reason why these types of effects, where you get stunned or, you know, rooted or whatever, exist in a game like D&D is because it is the easiest way that the designers had to think of, like, how do we, you know, pump the brakes on player characters? How do we make these monsters scary? How do we make them challenging? And yeah, removing turns is a very effective way to do that. It's the most natural way to turn when you're thinking of any kind of control effect. Lose a turn. It's in the most basic of board games. I recently had the opportunity to play the Royal game of and yeah, that has a lose a turn mechanic. You just, if you, cause you don't roll dice, you throw like 4 coins, and the coins are either 0 or 1, and that's how far you move a thing. If you throw all zeros, you just don't get a turn. You don't do anything that turn. You just move 0. It is one of the oldest game mechanics that we have in existence, the lose a turn mechanic. And so I understand why these things exist, but I think in the modern age of game design, we don't need them. I think we can do better. You know, I think we've advanced to the point where we can come up with alternative solutions that convey the same amount of threat, or a comparable amount of threat. It doesn't need to be the same. It conveys the threat of the situation. It is an obstacle or a hazard or a difficulty that the players have to deal with, but it does not take away player agency and allows them to continue engaging with the game mechanics. Losing a turn sucks, and it should, I dare say, it should never happen. In a good RPG, I think that should never happen. No, I think that's a little extreme. I can think of an example of a good RPG where it does happen. I can think of multiple examples, actually. But they would be better if it didn't. So I think a good RPG can afford to not let this happen. Let's say that.